Are you telling me the truth? Well, yes. Do you promise? Yes. Swear to me that it's true. That's basically how the conversation went. It was a long time ago, but the person never did believe me. They never trusted that what I was telling them was actually true. You see, in our world, so many people have lied. And so many people have broken promises. And so many people have not followed through with what they have said that they were going to do, that people just don't believe. They don't trust. A few months ago, my cousin got married. And the guy who was performing the ceremony was a guy I grew up with. I went to church with. And it was interesting because as he was going through the ceremony, at one point he actually said, "I don't do many weddings." And he says, "I don't like to do many weddings." And he went on to explain the reason why is because people don't take it seriously. So many people will enter a marriage and make a vow without really making a vow. Or they've cheapened it to where it says, well, I promise to do this, but later, we'll see. It gets hard, well, we can just break our promise. People don't take the commitment seriously. Now, it's true. And with so many people who don't keep their word, or who promise something that they can't deliver, it's no wonder that people have a problem trusting others. And when it comes right down to it, there are two reasons you might not trust a promise. Either the person who's making the promise is not faithful or not reliable, or the person who's making the promise is not able to deliver on his promise, not able to come through. They're not strong enough or don't have the resources to come through make good on their promise. Now we know that neither of these things are true of our God. He is faithful, He is reliable, and He is able to do whatever He says He will do. So why do we fail to trust Him? Why do we worry? Why do we get discouraged? The problem is not in God. But sometimes we need to be reminded of that fact. We need to be reminded that our God is reliable and that our God is able. And so as we begin today in chapter 5, 2 Samuel chapter 5, the first verses, we're going to see that God fulfills His promises. Look at chapter 5, verse 1. Then all of the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, "Behold, we are your bone and flesh. In times past, when Saul was king over us, it was you who led out and brought in Israel. And the Lord said to you, you shall be shepherd of my people Israel, and you shall be prince over Israel." So all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. And so as we read these verses, we see that David is finally king over all of Israel. But I want you to notice a couple things here. First of all, it says that all the tribes of Israel came. And so they are now united in their desire to make David their king. But not only that, it says that they came to David. David didn't go out and solicit this. He didn't go on the campaign trail. He didn't go around and say, "Hey guys, now it's time to make me king." What had happened? They came to him at Hebron. They approached him. And the reasoning that they had for doing it, their reason for making David king is pretty solid. They give 3 reasons. The first is, we are your bone and flesh. In other words, we're relatives. We're all Israelites. We're relatives. The second one is that in times past, when Saul was king, you're the one who led us, well, in and out. In other words, to battle. So David was the one who led Israel into battle. He commanded the armies. He is the one that went out. He was the military leader, and he had many great victories while he was leading the army. And the people knew that, and they remembered that. David had proven himself. He had already led them well, and they had seen that he was a good protector of Israel. So they said, it makes sense. Then their third reason, and I think probably should have been the first reason, is that the Lord said. They said, and God even said this. This is the big one. God had said that David was to lead them. But what he actually said is that he shall be shepherd of my people. Yet that's what important words. He shall be shepherd of my people. Now, first of all, whose people? God's people. They are not David's people. They are God's people. Now, a lot of times when someone's the ruler or the leader or the king, they think these are my people. God's people. Secondly, the king here is pictured like a shepherd. Now, what does a shepherd do? He takes care of his sheep. So he cares for the flock. He watches over them. He makes sure they're fed. He makes sure they're kept safe. He would even lay down his life, a good shepherd would anyway, for the sheep. Okay? And so this is what a shepherd does, and this is the way the king is described. So David, as the king, is in this position for the good of the people, for the good of God's people. He's not made king for his own personal gain, for his own advantage, but he is there to take care of God's people. Now, this picture of a shepherd is also used to describe Jesus, the great king, the descendant of David, the greater descendant, the greater king than David. But it's used of Jesus. He is the good shepherd. He is the one who literally laid down his life for his people. Jesus was hung on a cross and died to pay the price for our sin so that we could be forgiven, so that we could be set free, so that we can have a relationship with God. This is Jesus, the good shepherd. But also, in the New Testament, there's someone else who is described like a shepherd, or other people described like shepherds. Pastors and elders are shepherds. You see, pastors and elders are set in position, in place to care for who? God's people. Not my people, not the elders' people, but God's people. And we are in a position not to benefit, but to care, to equip, to build up, to help. Elders and pastors are shepherds, and we serve for the good of God's people. Well, once the people of Israel come to David and they suggest that he be their king, David then takes the lead and makes a covenant with them, and then they make David their king. And so now, at this point, Israel is following God and living in line with his plan. David shall be king, let's make David king. So they were following in line with God's plan. Let's keep reading verse 4. It says, David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. At Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months. And at Jerusalem, he reigned over all Israel and Judah 33 years. Now here we have a very simple summary of David's reign over as king over all of Israel, or both Judah and then all of Israel. So first he reigns in Hebron over just the one tribe of Judah. And then it says, then it says that he reigned in Jerusalem over all of Israel. Now here's the interesting thing. David wasn't really in Jerusalem right away. He ruled over all of Israel, but it wasn't really from Jerusalem for several years later. There were other people living in Jerusalem at the time, but it wasn't for several years later. But Jerusalem did become the capital, so in this simple summary, it's mentioned that way. But this and several things in this chapter are not in strict chronological order. As you read through it, you'll see they are arranged more thematically than chronologically. They're arranged thematically to emphasize the fact that God had made David king in Israel. That God had done what he said, had kept his promise, and made David king in Israel. And so God's decree, his promise, came to be. This is the highlight of these verses and really all the first chapters of 2 Samuel. The highlight is that God said it and he made it happen. He made David king. It's been years in the coming. Saul tried to stop it. David made some mistakes along the way. Others came in and tried to manipulate the situation for their own benefit and change it, bring it into their favor. But in the end, God did what he said. God made David king. He made good on his promise. And so this death of Saul and the humiliating defeat by the Philistines brought some hard times, some times of unrest. But God had made a promise to his people. He had made a promise to David, and his people can count on his promises. God's promises are sure. And today we may face some times of struggles. We may face struggle, but we can hold on to God's promises as well. We can hold on to God's promises and we can know that there is a better day ahead. Now here's the thing. It may or may not happen in this lifetime. I'm not guaranteeing you that in 5 days from now everything's going to be roses. But I guarantee you, if you are a believer in Jesus, that one day Jesus will return and take us to be with him, and it will be good. There is a better day ahead. We have that promise, and that promise is certain. If we are his, he is with us, both now and for eternity. That is a promise. And another great thing about God's promises, they never expire. Have you ever gone to the store with your coupon? And you're like, this is going to be so good. I got this coupon. I'm going to save money. And you hand it there and they say, that's expired. I'm like, what? You're right. I guess I couldn't read it. But God's promises don't expire. All right? We can count on that. Look at verse 6. Verse 6 says, and the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites and the inhabitants of the land, who said to David, you will not come in here, but the blind and the lame will ward you off, thinking, David cannot come in here. Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, that is the city of David. So he took Jerusalem and he renamed it City of David because it was his. He took it, okay? But let me give you some background to this. God made a promise to Abraham. Remember that all the way back in Genesis? When God said to Abraham, I want you to go and leave your home and go to the land I'll show you, and Abraham did it, and he was walking through that land, and God says, this land, I'm going to give it to your descendants. I'm giving this land to you and your descendants. And when he gave him that promise and said, I'm going to give you this land, he named off the people groups that were living in the land at the time. Included in that list of names were the Jebusites. Now, when God first brought Israel into the land, after he took them out of Egypt and they wandered for 40 years and he brought them to the land, when God brought Israel to the land, he gave them the land, but they had to conquer the land. And see, what we have to understand is that when God gave the land to Israel, not only was he giving them the land, he was also judging the current inhabitants of the land. And that's why they had to conquer them, because God was judging them for their sin. And so he gave them the land, but he said, but you got to go take it. But he said, but I promise you, I will be with you. Well, as we went through our study of Numbers, of Joshua and Judges, we saw that they didn't conquer all of the land, right? And when Israel failed to conquer their land, we had statements like, it was too hard. Or they couldn't because they had chariots. And what did we say? When Israel failed to conquer the land, it wasn't God's fault. It was the people failing to trust him and obey. They were too scared, or whatever reason, they didn't follow through in obeying God and taking the land. Well, that brings us back to our story here. The Jebusites were never removed from the land. In fact, there's 3 statements about this. You can read them. In the first one, in Judges 1:8, it tells us that Judah fought against the people of Jerusalem, that would be the Jebusites, and they won the battle. But Joshua 15:63 says that Judah wasn't able to remove the inhabitants of the city. So somehow they had a battle, but they weren't able to get the people out of the walled city. They weren't able to move them out of that and take the city. Then we were also told in Judges 1:21 that Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin, they also didn't drive out the Jebusites. And so they lived there with them in the land. That's where our situation is. That's where we're picking up the story. But real quickly, another thing about Jerusalem. It was the perfect site for the capital of the new united kingdom of Israel, with him ruling over all of Israel. And there's actually 3 reasons for that. One, it had never been conquered by Israel, and so it had never belonged to any of the tribes, so it was a neutral city. Secondly, it was on the border between the territory of Judah and the rest of the northern tribes. And thirdly, it was a very strong strategic location that made it very difficult to conquer. So that brings us back to 2 Samuel. The Jebusites were never defeated by Israel. They had been there for many years. And they were in a very secure position in their fortress on the top of the mountain. So they got cocky. They were arrogant and they started talking trash. They were just taunting David. There's no way you can get in here. And in fact, they said, if you try, even the blind and the crippled would be able to fight you off. In other words, you are no problem for us. We are not worried at all. We'll just send the blind and the crippled to fight you off. That's how easy it is. Of course, they were wrong. And David took the city. And the next verses give us a little more detail. Look at verse 8 through 10. It says, and David said on that day, whoever would strike the Jebusites, let him get up the water shaft to attack the lame and the blind, who are hated by David's soul. Therefore it is said, the blind and the lame shall not come into the house. And David lived in the stronghold and called it the city of David. And David built the city all around the Millo inward. And David became greater and greater. for the Lord, the God of hosts, was with him. So David has a plan to get into the city of Jerusalem and to defeat those arrogant inhabitants, the arrogant Jebusites in them. And he refers to the Jebusites as the blind and the lame. Now, this is a derogatory comment that he's using for them, but what he's doing is he's using their own mocking words and turning it around on them. You said the blind and lame are going to defend it? Well, let's go get the blind and the lame. So he's turning around their arrogance and their mocking back on them. So David had apparently found the city's water source. And if it is what archaeologists have found, this is what it looks like. It was a vertical shaft almost 40 feet tall. And what would happen is the people inside the city could walk down a tunnel that went underneath the city wall and came to this shaft. And there was a 40-foot drop, almost 40-foot drop. And they could lower buckets down and get water and pull it up in the city. That means if the city was under siege, if the army was camped outside the city, not letting anything in or out, they could still survive for a long time because they had water. And so this is the situation. And so David found their water source. And they likely climbed up the shaft and surprised the Jebusites. 1 Chronicles 11 tells us that Joab was the first to attack. And he was made commander of the army of Israel as a result of it. But David took the city. And he became stronger and stronger. But the ultimate reason given for David's success, for David's strength, is that God was with him. Now, it's interesting that the very first thing we're told about David doing as king is going up against the Jebusites in Jerusalem. Now, we know he didn't actually do that till later, but the first thing we're told about is this activity. But it's striking here. But David is taking up God's command from many, many years earlier. And I think this is brought here to tell us, to show us that David is ready to go finish the job that Joshua had started. Taking the land that God had promised. Taking the land that God said, this is yours, just go conquer it. But what's striking in this victory that David won over the Jebusites is that God gave them the victory and he kept his promise to Abraham to give them the land of the Jebusites. Now this promise was about 1,800 years old. 800 years old. Well, my math is today. This promise was about 800 years old. But the promise was still good. You see, time does not deteriorate God's promises. And also, God is patient. Sometimes we're not so patient. We're like, God, why aren't you doing this faster? God, when are you going to do that? God is patient. And so, if you look around and you don't see God working in a certain area, or maybe it seems to you that God is not working, it doesn't mean that he isn't. God's promises don't expire. Well, so David is king. And David was strong because God was with him. And God is the ultimate source of strength. Verse 11 says, And Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David and cedar trees, also carpenters and masons, who built David a house. And David knew that the Lord had established him king over Israel, and that he had exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people Israel. So even people outside of Israel had recognized that David was king. They saw David as king and they sent to honor him. And this recognition and the blessings that he received made it clear to David that God had done this for him, that God had truly established him as king. Verse 13. And David took more concubines and wives from Jerusalem after he came from Hebron, and more sons and daughters were born to David. And these are the names of those who were born to him in Jerusalem: Shemua, Shobab, Nathan, Solomon, Ibhar, Elishua, Nepheg, Japhia, Elishama, Eliada, and Eliphelet. Now here we get another brief report that was very similar to the one we saw earlier of David and the sons that were born to him in Hebron. On one hand, it's showing the growing strength of David. When he has children, it shows that his house is growing, his strength is growing. But on the other hand, it shows us the error of David. He is acquiring more and more wives. He's doing like the other kings did in his time. They would have many wives. And David is doing that as well. But in doing so, he is also disobeying God. Now, again, the author makes no comment about it. But he's letting us know that David is not doing everything right. Let's keep reading verse 17. It says, when the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king over Israel, all the Philistines went up to search for David. But David heard of it and went down to the stronghold. Now the Philistines had come and spread out in the valley of Rephaim. And David inquired of the Lord, shall I go up against the Philistines? Will you give them into my hand? And the Lord said to David, go up, for I will certainly give the Philistines into your hand. And David came to Baal-perazim, and David defeated them there. And he said, the Lord has broken through my enemies before me like a breaking flood. Therefore the name of the place is called Baal-perazim. And the Philistines left their idols there, and David and his men carried them away. Now this event probably happened pretty quick after David was made king, because it says the Philistines heard about this and came up. So this one is probably chronologically pretty soon after he was made king. So the Philistines hear about David becoming king, and they don't like it because they know him and they know his reputation. Earlier, the Israelites said, you're the one who let us in and out. The Philistines bore the brunt a lot of that military leading in and out, because the Philistines would fight against Israel, and David led them and had many victories over the Philistines. They know what a warrior he is. They know what a great leader he is. And so they hear that he's been made king. They don't like it. And so they go up and they basically are looking for David. It sounds as if they're trying to even kill him or assassinate him or something, but they're looking for David. They want to get him. But David finds out about it, and he goes down to the fortress. In other words, some secure place. And when he gets there, though, the rest of the Philistines, they come out to the valley of Rephaim, and there they set up and they're ready for battle. So does David just rush out to battle? No. First, he talks to God. He consults God. Now, it's interesting because normally you would expect, hey, my enemy is coming to battle. What does a king do? Well, let's go out and march against them and fight against them. But David first, before he does anything, he goes to God. And he consults God and says, what should I do? Should I go out to battle? Will you give me the victory? And God answers him and he says, yes, go. He says, I will give you the victory. Now, God had said that David would be king. And when he said that David would be king, he also said that he would rescue Israel from the Philistines. So it begins. God says, go. But when David goes out and he fights this battle and he wins this battle, he gives all the credit to God. I mean, David was a great leader. David was a great warrior. But he says, it's only because of God that I've won these battles. He gives all the credit to God. Because God was with them and God fought for them. And he pictures God like water that's breaking through a dam and washing away everything in its path. He says that's the power of God. That's the greatness of God. You can't stand against him. And the so-called gods of the Philistines were no match for the true God. And this is clearly seen by the fact that their idols were left littered all over the valley. And we're told that they went and they collected them all up. Why did they collect them all up? To destroy them. You might think that was the end, but no, the Philistines decide to try again. Look at verse 22. And the Philistines came up yet again and spread out in the valley of Rephaim. So they're in the same place, starting again. Verse 23, and when David inquired of the Lord, he said, you shall not go up, go around to their rear and come against them opposite the balsam trees. And when you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the balsam trees, then rouse yourself. For then the Lord has gone out before you to strike down the army of the Philistines. And David did as the Lord commanded him and struck down the Philistines from Geba to Gezer. So David again asks, should I go and face them in battle? And this time God says no. At least not directly. He tells them, you need to march around behind them. And when you hear the sound of marching echoing in the tops of the trees, then you go out and start attacking. But it's interesting because the reason he says is because God is fighting for you. In other words, when you hear that, the Lord has gone out. So God is going before you. He's fighting for you. When you hear the sound, that's when you go and God is fighting with you. He's fighting for you. So David, they heard that, they attacked, and they pursued the Philistines. They won the battle and pursued the Philistines and drove them out of Israelite territory. David obeyed God and was completely victorious because God was with him. You see, God worked through David. David who sought to follow his God. God removed the humiliation of the defeat that they suffered under Saul's leadership. The great Philistines, who had just conquered Israel and killed Saul, the great Philistines were no problem for God. So if God is with his people, they were no problem for God's people either. In both of these episodes, God is pictured as a mighty warrior. He has no weakness. His power is unmatched. There is no enemy too great for him. He strikes them down and washes away those who stand against his people. God is with his people. God is with us. He's with his people. He is with us. As God's people today, we are not fighting battles against physical enemies, but God is with us. Ephesians 6:10-13 says, finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand firm. You want to be faithful to God? You want to stand strong? Well, look to God. He is the greatest source of strength. He is our source of strength. As God's people today, we don't have a mission to take the land in battle. But we do have a mission to take the message of Jesus to the world. And God is with us. Matthew 28, 18 through 20, it says, "And Jesus came and said to them, 'All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded. And behold, I am with you always, to the end of the age.'" And you may say, "I can't do it on my own." And you're right. But you don't have to. Jesus said, "I am with you." Our God is with us. He is our source of strength. And as God's people, we have the promise that Jesus is with us. But we also have the promise that we belong to Him and that He's coming back for us. And we will have complete victory over sin. And we will live with Jesus forever. That's an awesome promise. Philippians 3:20 and 21 says, "But our citizenship is in heaven. And from it we await a Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ, who will transform our lowly body to be like His glorious body by the power that enables Him even to subject all things to Himself." We have a great God, and He has given us great promises that will not fail. And He is the ultimate source of strength. So if you are struggling to be faithful, if you are struggling with some sin, if you are struggling with fear or waiting or discouragement or whatever your struggle may be, let me remind you, you can trust our great God. And I want to close just by reading one more passage for you. And you're probably very familiar with it. But it's Isaiah 40, verses 28 to 31. "Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might, He increases strength. Even youths shall faint and be weary, and young men shall fall exhausted. But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." Trust our great God.